The crowd roared like thunder. Lights flashed red and gold over the stage as Rick Saunders, the once legendary frontman of Steel Fire, struck the final chord of his solo, a flawless display meant to prove that age hadn't dulled his ego. The audience erupted in applause, chanting his name. Rick grinned, soaking in the worship like gasoline to flame. But at the edge of the stage, someone else was watching. A 12-year-old girl, barefoot in worn sneakers, her gaze locked not on the man but on the guitar. The way she looked at it wasn't like a fan. It was like someone hearing a voice only she could understand. "Hey!" she shouted between the noise, cupping her hands. "Can I try it?" Rick turned, amused. The crowd laughed. "You?" he said into the mic, smirking. "You think you can play this?" He raised his prized Gibson Les Paul, shining under the spotlight. "Sweetheart, this guitar's worth more than your daddy's car." The crowd howled with laughter, cameras flashing, but the girl didn't move. Her eyes didn't flinch. Rick chuckled, shaking his head. "Tell you what, if you can play that riff better than me, I'll pay you my whole fee tonight." The audience gasped, then cheered. It was a joke, another ego-driven stunt. But when the girl climbed up the side stairs, calm and steady, the laughter began to fade. She took the guitar like she'd been born with it. The weight didn't scare her. The crowd waited. Rick crossed his arms, confident he'd made a fool of her. Then her fingers touched the strings, and what came out wasn't noise. It was magic. And for the first time that night, the rock star went silent. Before we continue this story, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. And stay with us until the end, because what happened on that stage wasn't just a performance, it was a revelation. Just a few hours earlier, the Sunset Arena had been pure chaos. Fans crowding the gates, lights being tested, and a father trying to keep everything in order. George Hayes, one of the security guards, stood by the backstage entrance, his radio buzzing with updates. But his 12-year-old daughter, Laura, wasn't looking at the crowd. Her eyes were fixed on the stage. She'd grown up on her father's old rock records, Zeppelin, Queen, Guns N' Roses, and she'd always dreamed of touching a real electric guitar. But tonight wasn't about dreams. It was about keeping out of trouble while her dad worked. Still, as she peeked through the curtains and saw Rick Saunders tuning his shining Gibson Les Paul, something inside her sparked. She whispered to herself, "Just one note. I only want to feel one note." No one knew then that her innocent wish would collide with Rick's arrogance in front of thousands, and that when their worlds met, the music would never sound the same again. The noise of the crowd was deafening. The Sunset Arena, packed with flashing lights and restless fans, trembled beneath the echo of the last chord. Rick Saunders bowed dramatically, his Gibson Les Paul hanging from his shoulder like a crown of gold. He had just finished his signature solo, the one every guitarist dreamed of mastering, and he loved every second of it. "Thank you, Los Angeles," he shouted into the mic, sweat dripping down his forehead. "You've just witnessed a masterpiece," the crowd screamed back. He fed off their energy like a god absorbing lightning, but not everyone was screaming. Near the front barricade, pressed between fans and a metal railing, stood Laura Hayes, her small hands gripping the edge of the stage. Her eyes weren't on Rick's face or the flashing lights or the crowd. They were on that guitar. It gleamed under the spotlights, the vintage Gibson Les Paul classic, sunburst finish, the kind her father used to talk about in stories. He'd told her that guitar wasn't just wood and strings, it was magic, born in a time when music had soul. Rick Saunders lifted the Les Paul and ran his pick down the strings, making it growl. "Ah, she loves attention," he said into the mic. "Don't you, baby?" The audience laughed. He winked and kissed the neck of the guitar, the spotlight catching the sweat on his hands. Laura's father, George Hayes, was standing a few yards away, arms crossed, scanning the audience. He hadn't noticed her yet. The crowd was too loud, too chaotic. But Laura had an idea. She cupped her hands and yelled over the roar, "Can I play it?" At first, no one heard. Then a few heads turned. Rick looked down, squinting through the lights. "What was that?" The mic picked up a small, trembling voice. "Can I play your guitar?" The laughter that followed rolled across the arena like thunder. Even the drummer, Dax, cracked a grin behind the kit. Rick leaned on his mic stand, amused. You want to play this?" He lifted the Les Paul again, strumming a heavy, growling chord that shook the speakers. The crowd roared with laughter and cheers. Phones came up. Someone yelled, "Let the kid try it." Rick grinned. "All right, sweetheart. You play this riff better than me, and I'll pay you my whole fee for tonight. Deal?" The audience exploded with whistles and applause. Backstage, Maggie Collins, the stage manager, groaned into her headset. "Rick, don't do this," she muttered. "You're gonna regret it." But Rick wasn't listening. He thrived on spectacle. "Security," he called out, looking around. "Where's her dad? Bring her up." And just like that, George Hayes appeared at the side of the stage, eyes wide when he saw his daughter. "Laura!" he yelled, his voice swallowed by the cheers. "What are you doing?" She turned, smiling. "Just one song, Dad." Before he could stop her, a security guard gave her a hand and she climbed onto the stage. Rick handed her the microphone. "What's your name, kid?" "Laura." "All right, Laura. You ever played one of these before?" She nodded shyly. "Not like that one." The audience laughed again. Rick chuckled, walking around her like a lion circling its prey. "All right then, Laura. Not like that one. Let's see what you got." He slung the Gibson Les Paul off his shoulder and handed it to her. The guitar was almost as big as she was. The crowd laughed again, but quieter this time. Curious now. Laura ran her fingers over the strings. Her father, watching from the wings, felt his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that look in her eyes, the same one he'd seen in front of the old record player when she was little, hearing her first Hendrix solo. Rick stepped back, crossing his arms. "Go ahead, sweetheart. Show us your magic." The arena fell silent, thousands of people waiting for a child to fail. Laura took a deep breath and adjusted the strap awkwardly. The guitar rested heavy against her small frame. She closed her eyes, her fingers trembling, not from fear, but from something else. Recognition. Then she strummed a single note. It rang out, pure and clean. The second note followed, bent slightly, vibrating like a whisper through the speakers. The crowd quieted. Even Rick tilted his head, the smirk fading just a bit. She kept playing, her hands moving instinctively, as if the guitar were answering her thoughts. The melody wasn't complicated. It was emotional, real, the kind of music that didn't need perfection because it had truth. The drummer's smile faded. Maggie lowered her headset. George forgot to breathe. Rick Saunders, the man who'd played with legends, who'd commanded arenas for decades, was staring at a 12-year-old who had just stolen his audience with nothing but sincerity. When the final note faded, there was no immediate applause, only stunned silence. Then one clap, then another. And suddenly the entire arena erupted. People stood, cheering, crying, holding up their phones. The chant began softly. "Laura, Laura, Laura." Rick's throat tightened. He forced a laugh into the mic, but it cracked mid-sentence. "Guess I'll need to get my wallet, huh?" The crowd laughed, but everyone knew. It wasn't about the money anymore. Laura looked up, smiling nervously. "I didn't mean to." Rick stepped closer and whispered, so only she could hear. "Kid, you just played something I've been trying to find for years." Then he lifted her small hand high into the air like a champion. The lights blazed down. The cameras flashed. And for the first time in a long time, Rick Saunders remembered what it felt like to love music. And as the echoes of her song filled the arena, the crowd didn't just cheer for a child. They cheered for a truth everyone had forgotten. That genius isn't born from fame, but from fearlessness. By morning, the entire world had seen it. The clip, shaky, recorded from a fan's phone, showed a young girl stepping on stage, a rock legend smirking beside her, and the impossible that followed. Within hours, the video flooded social media. 12-year-old outsmarts Rockstar live on stage. On every platform, the comments burned like wildfire. She played with more soul than he did. That kid's gonna be a legend. Rick Saunders just met his match. For Laura Hayes, it still didn't feel real. She woke up to her father shaking her shoulder gently. "Sweetheart, you're on TV." Her sleepy eyes opened to see a morning news show replaying the moment she touched the Gibson. The announcer's voice echoed through their small apartment. In a surprising twist at last night's Steel Fire concert, a 12-year-old girl stunned the crowd and the frontman with an impromptu guitar solo that has since gone viral. Laura rubbed her eyes. "That's me." George chuckled, his deep laugh breaking into disbelief. "That's you, kiddo. You made half the world cry last night." But he couldn't ignore the worry behind his pride. Fame had sharp edges, and he knew how cruel the world could be once the applause faded. Meanwhile, Rick Saunders sat in his hotel suite, curtains drawn, a coffee going cold beside him. His phone buzzed endlessly, hundreds of notifications, headlines, and messages from people he hadn't heard from in years. "Rick, you've been dethroned. That kid's incredible. Maybe feature her next show. Are you okay, man?" He stared at the paused video on his laptop, the exact second Laura struck her first note. Her face wasn't one of fear. It was focus, the kind of focus he hadn't felt since he was her age. Rick leaned back, sighing. "Damn it," he muttered to himself. "She played better than me." By afternoon, reporters were camped outside the arena gates. Someone tracked down George through his security badge. He refused every interview request, but that didn't stop them from showing up outside their small two-bedroom home. Maggie Collins, the band's stage manager, called first. "George, you need to hear this from me before it hits the press," she said. "Rick wants to meet her again." George blinked. "You're joking." "No, he's got a statement coming out. Something about offering her a mentorship, maybe even a recording opportunity." He looked toward Laura, who was on the floor, watching the video replay again, her fingers moving through invisible chords. "She's a kid, Maggie. I'm not throwing her into that world." Maggie's tone softened. "I know, but she's already in it. Whether you like it or not, she's become a symbol." By evening, the Tonight Hour ran a segment called "The Girl Who Reminded the World Why Music Matters." Clips played of Rick's smirk turning to awe, of Laura's small hands dancing across the strings. People weren't just sharing the performance. They were arguing about it. Some said Rick had staged it for publicity. Others said it was the first honest moment he'd had in years. And through it all, Laura's name trended worldwide. When Rick finally broke his silence, his publicist expected a defensive statement. Instead, he went live on his social media, his eyes tired but clear. "I've played thousands of shows," he said, "but last night reminded me what music's supposed to feel like. That girl didn't play for fame or money or ego. She played for the sound, for the truth. I forgot what that was." He paused, looking down for a long moment. "Laura Hayes, if you're watching this, I owe you something bigger than a paycheck. You gave me back my fire." George didn't know whether to be proud or scared. "This guy doesn't even know us, Laura. He lives in a world that eats people alive." But Laura's reply was quiet, certain. "Dad, I just played. I didn't mean to start anything." He sighed, rubbing his temple. "Yeah, well, you did." The following week, the invitations started pouring in. Talent agencies, music schools, TV producers. Each promised to make her a star. But Laura wasn't thinking about fame. She was thinking about the sound, the way that guitar had felt under her fingertips. One night, she found her father sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through bills. "Dad," she asked, "do you think people get scared when they're doing what they were born to do?" He looked up. "Every single one of them, honey." She smiled. "Good. Then maybe I'm doing it right." Rick Saunders, meanwhile, had been spiraling through something he didn't expect. Reflection. For years, his shows had been about ego, spectacle, perfection. But perfection, he realized, was lifeless. It had no heart. He started practicing again. Not the big riffs, the simple ones. The ones that once made him feel something. Dax, the drummer, noticed the change first. "You're quiet lately," he said during rehearsal. Rick shrugged, trying to listen more. "To what?" He looked up, almost embarrassed. "To the music." Dax smiled. "Guess the kid taught you a thing or two." Rick smirked. "Guess she did." 2 weeks later, an official letter arrived at the Hayes household. It was hand-delivered, marked with the band's logo. Inside was a short message written in Rick's own handwriting. "Dear Laura, you reminded me why I picked up a guitar in the first place. I want to invite you and your father to our next show, this time not as guests, but as part of the band." Rick George read it twice, speechless. Laura's eyes glimmered. "He wants me to play?" George hesitated, thinking of the spotlight, the pressure, the endless eyes. "He wants to share a stage with you. That's different." Laura smiled softly. "Maybe it's the same thing." That night, George went to check on her before bed. Her door was slightly open, and through the crack, he saw her sitting cross-legged on the floor, strumming an old acoustic guitar, one of his from years ago. The tune was simple, pure. He leaned against the doorframe and whispered, "You sound just like your old man." She smiled without turning. "No, Dad. I sound like me." And somewhere across town, Rick Saunders stood on his balcony overlooking the city lights, a quiet grin on his face as he watched a replay of that same viral video one last time. He muttered to himself, "Yeah, kid, you stole the show." But deep down, he knew she hadn't just stolen the show. She'd stolen back the meaning of music itself. And as the world cheered a child for playing a song, two lives on opposite sides of the stage found something far greater than fame. They found redemption in the same melody. The Madison Hall Stadium blazed with light that night. The smell of sweat, smoke, and electricity filled the air, the smell of a concert about to explode. The banners read, "Rick Saunders, live, the fire returns." But tonight, something was different. This wasn't just another show. This was the night Rick had promised himself to do something he hadn't done in years. Listen. Backstage, chaos ruled as usual. Roadies carried cables, sound engineers argued over decibels, and photographers flashed like fireflies. But in the middle of the noise, Rick Saunders stood silent, tuning his guitar. His movements were slower now, deliberate, almost reverent. Every note he played in warm-up was softer than the man he used to be. "Boss," said Dax, the drummer, resting his sticks on his shoulder. "You sure about this?" Rick smiled faintly. "If I don't do it now, I'll never do it." Dax chuckled. "You mean sharing the stage?" Rick gave him a knowing look. "I mean giving it to someone who deserves it." Out in the stands, George Hayes and Laura found their seats among thousands. For a man used to standing guard at the back of crowds, sitting in one felt strange. Laura's eyes were wide with wonder. The stage lights painted her face gold and blue as the pre-show buzz filled the air. "Dad," she said softly, "I can't believe he invited us." George smiled nervously. "Yeah, neither can I." He adjusted his old leather jacket, the same one he wore back when he used to play small clubs before life got serious. He looked at his daughter, that spark in her eyes, and felt something twist in his chest. Pride and fear, the kind only a parent could understand. When the lights dimmed, the stadium roared. A heartbeat of silence, then the opening chords ripped through the dark. Rick Saunders stepped into the spotlight like a man reborn. Gone was the arrogance. He greeted the audience with a simple wave, a humble grin. "Good evening," he said into the mic. "You all know who I am, but tonight, it's not about me." The crowd murmured, curious. Rick continued, "You've probably seen the video by now, the one where I got my ego handed to me by a 12-year-old. Laughter rippled through the stands. He smiled. "Well, she's here tonight, and I think it's time I made good on my promise." The spotlight swung to the crowd and stopped on Laura. Thousands of heads turned. A wave of cheers rose as camera screens lit up around her. She froze. George's heart nearly stopped. "Sweetheart," he whispered, "you don't have to." But she was already standing. Rick extended his hand from the stage. "Come on up, Laura. Let's make some music." The stadium roared as security guided her forward. The noise was deafening, yet when she stepped onto the stage, the world felt quiet. Rick knelt to her level, his smile warm but sincere. "You remember this?" He handed her a smaller vintage Gibson Jr. custom-painted cherry red. "She's yours tonight." Laura stared, speechless. "Yours?" He nodded. "No, ours, for this song." The drummer hit the sticks. Click, 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 click. And just like that, they started playing. Together. Rick led the intro, a slow blues progression that rolled like thunder. Then Laura joined in, her fingers gliding effortlessly along the strings. The notes blended, two worlds colliding, past and future, arrogance and innocence melting into one shared sound. The crowd didn't scream. They listened. Rick looked over his shoulder mid-song, and what he saw nearly broke him. The audience wasn't cheering for him. They were feeling something, that old magic, the kind that made people believe music could save them. He turned to Laura, whispering, "Take the lead." She blinked. "Me?" He nodded. "Steal the show again." Laura took a breath and stepped forward. Her small fingers moved like lightning. Each note soared, alive and raw, bending perfectly into the soul of the song. By the time she hit the final high note, the audience was on its feet, not roaring this time, but clapping in rhythm, united. Rick strummed the closing chord and let it hang in the air before raising her hand again, just like he had at the first concert. But this time, it wasn't a stunt. It was respect. When the lights dimmed after the encore, backstage was chaos again. Reporters, managers, sponsors. Everyone wanted a piece of the story. But Rick ignored them all and found George waiting by the side curtain, his arms folded. "Mr. Hayes," Rick said, extending his hand. "Your daughter's, well, she's something else." George shook it cautiously. "Yeah, she is, but she's also 12. Rick nodded, understanding immediately. "And that's why I wanted to talk to you both." He led them to a quiet room backstage, away from the noise. The air smelled of sweat, coffee, and amplifier dust. Rick looked at Laura first. "Kid, you've got what most musicians spend their whole lives chasing, soul. But soul needs guidance. It needs time to grow." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket, an official letter with his signature and the logo of Rising Sun Records, the label he partly owned. "It's a mentorship offer," he said. "Not fame, not contracts, just lessons. I'll teach you everything I know, from the music to the madness." Laura's eyes widened. "You mean, you'll teach me to play like you?" He smiled. "No, I'll teach you so you never play like me." George couldn't help but laugh. "You really mean this?" Rick nodded. "I owe her that. She reminded me what this whole thing is about." George was quiet for a long time. He looked at Laura, her hopeful eyes, her trembling hands. Then at Rick, the man who had once mocked her, now humble, almost fatherly. Finally he nodded. "You can teach her, but I'll be there too. Every step." Rick smiled. Wouldn't have it any other way. Weeks passed. The story never left the headlines, but the noise began to shift. It wasn't about scandal anymore. It was about transformation. Rick and Laura started meeting every weekend in a small rehearsal studio on Sunset Boulevard. No cameras, no crew, just guitars, amps, and a notebook filled with handwritten lessons. He taught her chords, discipline, and how to protect her heart in an industry that didn't have one. And she taught him how to feel again. How to play not for perfection, but for meaning. Months later, during an interview, a journalist asked Rick what the biggest change in his life had been. He smiled and said, "Easy. I stopped chasing applause and started chasing truth." The reporter frowned. "And what does truth sound like?" Rick looked at the camera and grinned. "It sounds like a little girl with a guitar who reminded me why I ever picked one up. And as two generations shared a single song, the world remembered something too often forgotten. That real greatness isn't measured in fame, but in the courage to pass the torch when the music finds its next voice." The rehearsal room had become Laura's second home. Every Sunday, sunlight filtered through the dusty blinds and fell over two guitars, one old and scratched, the other shining like fire. Rick Saunders sat across from her, tapping his foot to a steady rhythm. "All right," he said. "Same progression, but this time don't just play the notes, tell me why you're playing them." Laura frowned. "What do you mean?" He leaned forward. "Music isn't about fingers, kid. It's about truth. Every string is a word. Every bend is emotion. If you don't feel it, no one else will." She nodded, biting her lip, and started again. Her hands moved with precision. Every note perfect, every transition clean. Rick stopped her halfway. That's the problem. It's perfect. She blinked. Isn't that what you wanted? He smiled softly. No, Laura. I've spent half my life being perfect. You just sound like you're trying to be me. I want you to sound like you. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat on her bed, guitar across her lap, replaying his words. Sound like you. But what did she sound like? She thought of her mother's laughter, her father's tired eyes, the hum of the city outside their apartment, all the things that made her who she was. Slowly, her fingers began to move on their own, plucking a melody that felt like a memory she'd never written down. It was gentle, honest, hers. She didn't know it yet, but that melody would one day echo through a stadium. 2 months later came her first real test. Rick had arranged a charity concert in the same arena where they first met. But this time, it wasn't his show. It was hers. Well, mostly hers. Don't overthink it, he told her backstage. Just go up there and play. Forget the cameras, the people, the noise. Laura clutched her guitar tightly. Easy for you to say. Rick chuckled. Kid, I've ruined enough shows to know. The only thing that matters is the first note. After that, it's all just you and the music. He squeezed her shoulder. And no matter what happens, I'll be right behind you. When she stepped onto the stage, the lights were blinding. The crowd wasn't roaring. They were waiting, expecting. She stood at the center, her small figure swallowed by the size of the venue. Her heart hammered in her chest. She could feel the echo of every step against the polished floor. She took a breath, remembering Rick's words. Every string is a word. Every bend is emotion. Her fingers touched the strings. The sound filled the hall. Not loud, not flawless, but alive. It rose like a whisper of memory, trembling, unsure at first, then finding courage. Somewhere backstage, Rick closed his eyes and smiled. That's it, he whispered. That's her. The audience sat motionless, hundreds of people listening not to a prodigy, but to a heart learning how to speak. When the song ended, Laura exhaled shakily. For a moment, no one clapped. Then one voice called out, "Play it again!" And just like that, the room erupted. After the show, Laura ran backstage, out of breath, cheeks flushed. Rick met her halfway, grinning. "You found it," he said. "What?" "Your voice." She laughed. "I thought I messed up halfway." He shrugged. "You did. That's what made it real." But the night wasn't over yet. As the two of them packed their gear, a man in a dark suit approached. Elliot Brand, an executive from Rising Sun Records. His presence carried the kind of authority that made even Rick stand straighter. "Mr. Saunders," Elliot said smoothly, extending a hand. "Impressive show. The girl has something pure." Rick's smile faded slightly. "We're not looking for contracts, Elliot." "Oh, come now," Elliot replied, glancing at Laura. "Talent like that doesn't stay small. We could give her everything. Lessons, studios, exposure. Imagine what she could become." Rick crossed his arms. "I already am." Laura looked between them, her pulse quickening. "I don't understand. Is this bad?" Rick sighed. "It's just business talk, kid. Sometimes they see dollar signs where I see heart." Elliot smirked. "You were heart once too, Rick. Until you realized heart doesn't pay the bills." The words stung. For a moment, Rick saw his younger self, ambitious, hungry, desperate to matter. But then he looked at Laura. "Maybe it doesn't," he said. but it keeps you alive long after the lights go out. Elliot smiled coldly. Suit yourself, but when she's ready for the real world, call me. He handed Laura a silver business card and walked away. Later, in the quiet of the empty arena, Laura sat on the edge of the stage, her legs dangling, guitar on her lap. Rick joined her, sitting beside her in silence. After a while, she asked, "Why did you say no?" He looked out over the empty seats. "Because I've seen what happens when people stop playing for themselves. They start chasing the noise, not the music." She nodded slowly. "I don't want to lose that." He smiled. "Then don't. Just promise me something." "What?" "When the world tries to turn your song into business, play louder." The sound of her quiet laughter filled the hall. Then, softly, she began strumming again. The same melody from her bedroom, now richer, wiser. Rick closed his eyes and listened, letting the music wash over him. He whispered almost to himself, "You're teaching me more than I ever taught you." And as the last note faded into silence, Laura realized something every artist eventually must. That talent wins applause, but only heart makes it last. The first sign that everything was changing came 3 weeks later. Laura woke up to her face on the cover of Teen Muse magazine. The headline read, "The Girl Who Revived Rock and the Man Who Found Redemption." Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Interview requests, social media notifications, brand deals. Overnight, she wasn't just the girl who played the Les Paul. She was the next big thing. At first, it felt like a dream. New guitar, new clothes, new fans. Her father, George, smiled but stayed wary. He'd seen enough headlines fade in his lifetime. But fame moves faster than truth. And soon, Laura's story, that innocent, magical moment on stage, began to twist into something else. Rick Saunders watched from the sidelines, arms crossed as producers from Rising Sun Records debated the Laura Hayes image. "She's a miracle story," one of them said. "Let's polish her up. Wardrobe, studio sessions, maybe a pop-rock crossover." Rick's jaw tightened. "She's a musician, not a mascot." Elliot Brand, the slick executive from before, smirked. "Rick, you've been in this business long enough to know. Image sells before art does." Rick slammed his coffee cup onto the table. "Then maybe that's why music's dying." But even as he fought, he couldn't stop the storm. Laura's innocent playing videos filmed during lessons were uploaded online, remixed, edited, monetized. Every note she played was now owned by someone else's marketing machine. At first, Laura didn't notice. She was too busy living in the whirlwind. She was invited to play live on the morning stage. The host smiled too wide. "You're an inspiration, Laura. The prodigy who outplayed a rock legend." She laughed shyly. "I just love music." The host leaned closer. "And we love a good story. Tell us, what's it like working with Rick Saunders?" She smiled again, rehearsed this time. "He's teaching me a lot." Behind the camera, Rick watched with mixed pride and dread. He could see the glint in her eyes, exhaustion hidden behind excitement. That night, after the show, Laura found him sitting alone backstage. "You didn't say much during the interview," she said, clutching her guitar case. He exhaled slowly. "Wasn't my moment to speak." She frowned. "They want me to do another one, tomorrow, for a sponsorship deal." He turned to her, his expression soft but firm. "Laura, remember when I said every string is a word?" She nodded. "Well, you're about to start playing songs you didn't write. And that's when you lose your voice." Her face fell. "But they said—" "I don't care what they said," he cut in. "What do you say?" Laura's throat tightened. She didn't answer. Days turned into weeks and the noise only grew louder. Fans screamed her name, agents demanded more appearances, and social media drowned her in love and pressure all at once. Then came the festival, the Golden Sound Awards, the biggest event of the year. Rick had refused to perform, saying he was retired for good. But Laura had been invited to headline a solo piece. It was supposed to be her triumph, until the rehearsals. Elliot Brand arrived, dressed in black. carrying a clipboard full of new arrangements. "We've reworked your set," he said. "Add backing tracks, lights, dancers. Think pop, not blues." Laura froze. "But that's not my song." Elliot smiled coolly. "It is now. It's what people want." Rick stepped forward. "Not her audience." Elliot turned to him. "You had your era, Saunders. Don't project your regrets onto her success." For a moment, the old fire returned to Rick's eyes. "I'm protecting her from the thing that killed me." Elliot's grin widened. "You can't protect her forever." The night of the festival arrived. The stadium was packed, lights flashing, banners waving her name. But backstage, Laura sat frozen, guitar in hand. The crew rushed around her, adjusting mics and earpieces, but all she could hear was the sound of her own heartbeat. Rick found her in the chaos. "You okay?" She looked up, eyes wet. "I don't want to play their song." He knelt in front of her. "Then don't." "But if I don't, they'll hate me." He smiled sadly. "Then play something worth being hated for." Minutes later, her name was announced. "Ladies and gentlemen, the youngest performer ever to headline the Golden Sound Awards, Laura Hayes." The audience erupted. The lights dimmed. She walked onto the stage, trembling, clutching her guitar. The pre-recorded track started blaring behind her. Glossy, overproduced, soulless. She hesitated. Her fingers hovered over the strings. The pressure was unbearable. And then, she unplugged the cable. The music stopped dead. The crowd gasped. She stepped forward, gripping the mic. "This isn't my song." There was silence. Even the cameras stopped moving. She took a breath and whispered, "This is." Every note cut through the air like truth. No lights, no dancers, no filters, and just sound. Real sound. The kind that can't be packaged. Rick stood in the wings, tears in his eyes, whispering, "That's my girl." When she finished, the stadium was silent for 5 full seconds, then exploded into applause so loud it shook the walls. Laura lowered her guitar and smiled through tears. That night, the headlines didn't say, "The next pop star." They said, "The girl who said no," and brought music back to life. After the show, Elliot Brand stormed backstage. "Do you realize what you've done?" he hissed. "You embarrassed sponsors, ruined deals." Rick stepped between them. "She played her song." Elliot glared at him. "And what did that get her?" Rick smiled. "Freedom." Elliot scoffed and walked away. Laura looked at Rick. "Was that okay?" He chuckled. "Okay, kid? That was the best thing I've ever seen." Later that night, they sat on the empty stage, surrounded by confetti and cables. Laura leaned her head on her guitar. "I think I finally get it." Rick raised an eyebrow. "Get what?" "What you meant, about heart." He smiled softly. "Yeah?" She nodded. "It's not about being perfect, and it's about being real." Rick leaned back, gazing at the ceiling lights above them. "That's the only thing that lasts." And as applause faded into quiet, Laura learned what every true artist must, that the storm of fame will always come, but the only shelter worth keeping is the song inside your soul. Years passed. The noise faded, but the music never stopped. Laura Hayes had become a name known around the world, not because she chased fame, but because she'd done the opposite. Her songs weren't about lights, money, or spectacle. They were about truth, the kind that finds you in quiet rooms and late-night car rides when the world finally stops shouting. And somewhere, behind every note she played, lived the echo of a man who'd once laughed at a little girl and her dream. A man who'd taught her how to protect it. 10 years later, Los Angeles. The Sunset Arena glowed again, just like it had the night everything began. The banner outside read, "A tribute to Rick Saunders, the fire that never faded." The man who had once commanded stages around the world had passed away quietly 2 months earlier. His last message to fans written in his unmistakable, scratchy handwriting. If you ever loved my music, don't mourn me. Play something honest instead. Inside, the crowd hummed with emotion. Old fans in leather jackets beside young faces who'd only known him through the internet. But all eyes turned when Laura stepped on stage. She wasn't the little girl anymore. She stood tall, her curls framed by soft light, a black guitar strapped to her shoulder. Rick's Les Paul, now weathered and precious. She took the microphone, her voice steady but warm. When I was 12, I met a man who thought I was just a kid with a dream. He laughed at me, and I thank God he did, because that laugh led to everything that came after, the lessons, the songs, the friendship that changed my life. She paused, smiling sadly. He once told me that every string is a word. And tonight, I want to speak his name the only way he'd want me to, through music. The first note rang out, haunting, beautiful, full of memory. Every face in the arena softened. Some wept. On the big screen behind her, footage began to play. The moment young Laura had first taken Rick's stage, her hands trembling, his proud smirk fading into awe. The crowd erupted in applause, a standing ovation that didn't stop for minutes. But Laura wasn't looking at them. She was looking upward, her eyes shining through tears. "This one's for you, Rick," she whispered. After the show, when the crowd had left and the arena stood quiet again, Laura sat alone on the edge of the stage, the same spot where Rick once told her, "Play something worth being hated for." She smiled softly. "I did, Rick. I really did." Her father, George, approached from the wings, a little grayer now but still proud. "She'd be proud of you," he said. "She?" Laura looked up. He chuckled. "Your mom. And him too, of course. But mostly her." Laura leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you think people ever stop needing mentors?" George smiled. "Only when they stop listening." Over the years, Laura started the Firelight Foundation, named after Rick's old band, Steel Fire. It wasn't a record label. It was a sanctuary for young musicians who couldn't afford lessons but refused to give up. She taught them what Rick had taught her, that music without truth is just noise, that failure is part of the song, and that the only applause worth chasing is the one inside your own chest. Every Friday night, she'd sit in the small rehearsal studio that once belonged to Rick and listen to the new generation play. Off-key, raw, passionate. Some of them reminded her of herself. One boy, no older than 12, nervously asked her, "Miss Laura, what if they laugh at me?" She smiled. "Then you play louder." One evening, as the sun dipped behind the Hollywood Hills, Laura sat by the window with her guitar, recording a final piece for her upcoming album. She titled it, "The Man Who Listened." The song wasn't sad. It was thankful. It carried every lesson, every shared silence, every argument, every laugh between her and Rick. Halfway through the take, her fingers trembled, not from nerves, but from love. She looked up at the ceiling and whispered, "I kept your fire burning." Then she played the final chord. When the album released, critics called it the most honest work of her generation. But Laura didn't care for reviews. She cared about the letters that came in from kids around the world. Messages like, "Your music helped me through my illness. I started playing because of you. My dad and I talk again after listening to your song." And one that stood out most, "I don't have much, but I have my voice. Thank you for reminding me it's worth something." She smiled reading that one. That was what it had always been about. 10 years later, Laura returned to the Sunset Arena once more. This time not as a star, but as a teacher, sitting quietly in the back row as one of her students walked nervously onto the same stage she once stood on. The girl was barely 11, holding a guitar almost too big for her hands shaking. She looked into the lights and whispered into the mic, "This one's for the woman who taught me to play for truth." Laura wiped a tear. The girl strummed the first chord, and as the melody filled the hall, Laura closed her eyes. For a moment she wasn't in the present. She was back there, 12 years old, barefoot, holding a Les Paul, hearing a man's laughter turn into silence. Somewhere beyond the noise, the music lives forever, because every note she played, every life she touched, carried Rick's lesson forward. Perfection fades. Truth echoes. And so it did. Through generations, through mistakes, through every trembling hand that dared to play again. The music never died. It only changed voices. And that's how a single moment of arrogance became the seed of generations of music, truth, and compassion, proving that sometimes the greatest songs aren't written with fame in mind, but with heart. Some stories end in applause, but the greatest ones echo long after the crowd goes home. Laura's journey reminds us that talent might open doors, but humility, courage, and guidance are what keep them open. One man's arrogance became another's awakening, and through it, a new generation found its sound. Because in the end, music, like love, forgiveness, and truth, only lives on when it's shared. Now it's your turn. Have you ever had someone who believed in you when no one else did? Or maybe you were that person for someone else? Tell us your story in the comments. And if this tale touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and share it, so that more souls remember what truly makes life sing.